Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Today is October 26th, and let's go ahead and get started. Just to let you know, I did put the exams into Canvas, and so you can log in and you can see your exam grade. I did not bring them to pass back today in class, just to let y'all know. I'll bring them Wednesday, and we can go over them then. For anybody at home, if you want to actually see your test itself, I'll be happy to show it to you, happy to find a way to get you a copy, but you'll have to get in touch with me. But you can log into Canvas and see your exam grade. Now, I also put in, and these were actually due a few days earlier, but I put in your midterm grades, okay? Now, keep in mind that when it comes to your midterm grades, they don't actually mean anything, right? It's your final grade that matters in the course. So the midterm grade is more of just sort of an assessment of how I think you're doing based on what your grades are, but it's kind of an estimate. So if you're concerned about your midterm grade, I mean, again, it doesn't go in your transcript or anything, but if you're concerned about it, get it up. And if you are happy with your exam grade, hey, that's great. If you need to improve, if you're not happy with your exam grade, just keep in mind there's still, more to go, right? We have 2 more quizzes, we have discussions, we have the other exam. There is still an opportunity to get your grade up. And as always, get in touch with me if you have any questions, concerns, whatever. Okay, we are now starting Module 5. So I hope everybody took the Module 4 quiz. I hope everybody participated in the discussions 7 and 8. Now it's time for Module 5, which we'll be working on for the next 2 weeks. So we're moving ahead. Okay, beginning about the year 1100. Now this is a very general date. There's no exact date on this. Beginning about the year 1100, life for the average European improved. Started to see steps in a much more positive direction. In a very general sense, things got better. Things got better. We are turning a corner from what historians have traditionally called the Dark Ages and beginning to take baby steps into what will become the modern era. So what happens about 1100 that starts this transition? Well, first and foremost, a critical step is that the people of Europe started producing more food. Agricultural production went up substantially, and the diet of the average European became more diverse. So they had more food and more different types of food to eat. This happens because of technology. There are a number of advancements that enable the land to become more productive. Hence, more food, which will then have a domino effect, making life in many ways considerably better. With more food, we will see healthier people, stronger people, able to get more done. And of course, people are living longer now, which increases all types of productivity. We also, not surprisingly, see an increase in the birth rate. More children are being born, and more children are surviving into adulthood. So the population is increasing. And again, larger population means a more productive society. We talked about this with the Neolithic era, and in many ways, this is sort of mirroring that. Now that there is a food abundance, plenty to eat, labor starts to diversify. We start seeing people engage in tasks and take up occupations that are not farming. We start to see skilled craftsmen emerge. We start to see people with unique qualities exploit those. We begin to see an increase in economics, an increase in more prosperity, et cetera, all because not everybody has to be a farmer anymore. From this, we see a greater increase in trade. We see the emergence and growth of towns and urban areas. And in these towns and urban areas are a different group of people, which we'll talk about later. We also start to see the beginnings. Again, 1100 is certainly an early part of this, but we see the beginnings of centralized government and authority figures with the ability to maintain order. And so society will be safer. It will be more secure. The bad guys will be kept in check, if you will. And even if this is clearly not all put in place by 1100, the ball is rolling. So you get the idea. So we're positive. Times are good. And it is worth noting that historians, particularly over the last roughly generation, have really debated how dark the Dark Ages really were. You know, how much of a contrast, say, the year 700 would have been with 1100 or 1300. You know, were people really that bad off during the era that we call the Dark Ages? Some argue, of course, that, yeah, things were pretty rough, and we can see that through a variety of measurable factors. But others argue that life probably wasn't all that different between the depth of the Dark Ages and when times have improved. We just don't necessarily have the records. But your typical peasant farmer is going to be your typical peasant farmer without much change. And so it's debatable. But we're sticking with a traditional interpretation that life really did improve. And there are clearly sets of evidence that indicate this. Well, let's talk about agriculture. We're producing more food, which sits at the foundation of all of it. Well, technology radically changes how people live. Goodness knows we know that in 2020. I'm not going to get into all of the developments. I can't talk about everything. But we are going to mention just a few technological advances that make a big difference. And one of them is the iron plow. During this era, Europeans begin using iron plows. Seemingly a simple development, it's actually revolutionary. Now, humans have been making stuff out of iron since antiquity. Iron had certainly been around in Europe. Tools and obviously weapons and stuff like that had been made out of iron. But see, iron is really tough and iron is really strong. Iron is a really, good metal. Unfortunately, we've got all of it that we want. The earth is really just one big ball of iron, right? That's what the core of the earth is. The problem, of course, is that hardness and toughness and strength also makes it very, very difficult to manipulate. In order to smelt something out of iron, man, you got to get that fire really, really, really hot. And you got to keep that iron hot while you're forming it. And so it just wasn't possible to create big pieces of iron. Your typical blast furnace just can't get that kind of heat going. An ordinary fire, forget it. You can't smelt or work with iron with an ordinary fire. You got to get something where you pump in a lot of oxygen and really heat it up. And a plow is just too big of a chunk. But by about this time, they figure it out. They can get a big enough fire going for a long enough period of time. And an iron plow cuts that earth really deep. It gets you to where you can get more seeds in the ground. It's not going to break if you hit a rock or a stump or something like that. Wooden plows just don't get the job done as well. So automatically, we're planting more crops. We're cultivating more land. And that's not all. There's other advancements made out of iron as well, other tools that they would use in the field. You get the idea. Another important development is the horse collar. Another important development is the horse collar. You see, an iron plow is going to be heavy. Pulling a plow by yourself, using a human to pull a plow is not much fun, and you're not going to cultivate much land that way. It'd be much better if we could have horses to pull that big, heavy iron plow. But the problem, and you can see another horse collar here, the problem is if you hook the plow up and then you throw a rope around the horse's neck and say, okay, start pulling, the rope's going to choke the horse. That rope is going to cut off their wind. And so the horse collar is just a leather ring that would go around the horse's head and enable you to hook the reins onto their shoulders, hook the rein onto the side. So now they're pulling with their body rather than pulling with their neck. It's not a complicated invention, of course, but it changes how fields are cultivated, because now horses can be used to pull those big heavy plows, and an awful lot more land can be cleared. In addition to horses, Europeans would also use oxen to clear fields and to pull the plows. An oxen is nothing more than a castrated bull, just in case you're wondering. You've heard the term oxen before. It's just a bull that's been castrated. Oxen tend to be very strong, but they're also very dumb. They're not intelligent, and so a horse is a lot smarter. You can train a horse to do a lot more. So horses are preferable, but any beast of burden to pull that big plow is going to get the job done. In addition to horse collars, we will also see the development of horseshoes during this era. Just a little bit about horses' feet. Horses' hooves are the equivalent of our fingernails. They're made out of keratin, and they're always growing, just like a fingernail would. And horses tend to have very weak feet. And so if a horse's foot gets injured, that's pretty much it for the horse. You have to euthanize the horse. Horses cannot have foot injuries that heal. Even today, even in 2020, if a horse gets a foot injury of any note, honest to goodness, they don't even try to keep it alive most of the time, because it's just not going to heal. And the reason for that is horses are pretty much always on their feet. They're always having to stand. So it just doesn't heal. So anyway, we got to protect those feet, especially if we need that horse to cultivate our land. And so a horseshoe is just sort of an iron U that they nail into the hooves to protect their feet. They don't hurt, because again, there's no nerves in there. It's just keratin. But you have to maintain their feet and keep it going. It's not something that you do once and forget it. You routinely have to take off the horseshoe, clean their hoof up, file it down real good, and then put a new one on. It's a thing. And just to let you know, horses' feet, again, they're weak and they're prone to injury. Horses are not designed to walk on pavement or concrete. Just even with horseshoes, it ain't good. So when you go to towns or cities or whatever, and you see those carriage rides, with the horses sitting there, use your own judgment, but just to let you know, that's pretty abusive. People who really know horses and care for horses tend to argue that that's really pretty cruel to do to those animals, because they don't live very long. Their feet get injured pretty quickly doing that. So there we have it. Anyway, horse collars and horseshoes now put horses in the field. You can see how that's going to change everything in terms of how much food we can produce. And we're not done. Windmills and water mills start popping up. We all know what a windmill is. We might not know what it's really used for. What is going on there is the wind is turning that big blade, that big fan up there. A shaft is then being turned, and down on the ground, the mechanical energy is being used probably to turn a stone, which you can then use to grind grain. You see, every day we have to bake bread and eat. Europeans live on grain crops almost exclusively. And grinding that grain by hand every day is an awful lot of work, and it takes up a lot of productive time. So if we could just dump a whole bunch of raw grain in there, let the wind grind it, we can fill up big sacks of flour, and that saves us a lot of energy. Windmills and water mills could be used for other tasks as well. They were used, for example, by the Dutch to clear fields of water. The Netherlands is very low and swampy, and so they would set these up and figure out ways to pump water out of fields and dry them up so they could plant crops, or in the case of the Dutch, they would build cities on. So we're engineering stuff, pretty cool. Another advancement is very simple, but it still took a while to sort out. Marker go. It is called the three-field system, or I don't have my marker. The three-field system, or crop rotation. What you do is you divide your field into 3 sections, and you rotate every year 1/3 of it where you don't plant anything. You let it go fallow. You only cultivate 2/3 of your land, and you let 1/3 sit. And in that 1/3, you let your livestock graze, your horses and your cattle or whatever. And the manure from those animals then gets back into the soil, and you just rotate it. And what that does is it keeps the soil from becoming exhausted. It enables the nutrients in the soil to replenish from one season to the next. And even though you're only cultivating 2/3 of your land, crop rotation actually provides a more stable yield and a higher yield. And again, it's very simple. The Chinese had figured this out long before the Europeans did. But it's counterintuitive. You know, if you have land, the idea is I'm going to cultivate every bit of it. And so leaving a portion of it fallow every year and deliberately just doing nothing is it's kind of an important step. Well, anyway, we can all see that this is good. Between the year 1000 and 1300, the European population went from 38 million to 74 million. So almost doubling. Between 1000 and 1300, the population goes from 38 million to 74 million. Clearly, we are seeing an improvement. You know, anyone who would say that the late Middle Ages were really not all that different from the early Middle Ages, well, the population will tell you a different story. During this time, serfdom decreases. More and more peasant farmers are owning their land rather than being bound to it as serfs. We also see an increase in renting land. You know, they might not own it, but they're renting it, which means that they're not serfs either, which still is a better quality of life. It opens the door for other types of personal advancement. Of course, we also know during this era that feudalism is on the decline. You know, the longbows and the crossbows that were so important are now becoming commonplace. Kings are now creating national armies that break the power of these noblemen that were getting in the way of progress. And don't let anything fool you. Disney has done a real good job of making feudalism look like some sort of romantic era with the gallant knights and the damsels in distress and all of that. I can assure you, feudalism was not good for anybody except the people at the very top. You know, serfdom and the chaos that was all of these different knights fighting each other all the time was not good for regular people. You know, it is good that feudalism came to an end. We are starting to see the beginning. Now, 1100, we're still a good distance away from it, but we are starting to see the beginning of centralized governments, where a capital city can now govern the land. Laws can be passed and enforced that everybody has to follow. You get the idea. It's going to take quite a few more generations and a lot more turmoil, but we're getting there. Feudalism is at least on the way out. And it's worth noting, by owning your own land or renting your land, you have a much greater incentive to maximize your crop yield, don't you? Because that's my land and that's my production and I keep everything I grow. If you're a serf who's bound to the land and basically owned by some nobleman, your life will not improve no matter how much you produce. And so the incentive is now there for people to improve their lives. Let's talk about economics. I mentioned earlier, we now will start to see diversification of labor. Towns and urban areas start to sort of emerge. Do you remember, we mentioned earlier that during the feudal era, the knights would get together every so often and practice and compete, and they would have the tournaments and all of that, right? Well, we also remember that these would become community events, and everybody would start showing up to watch all of this action take place, and it was a real big deal. Well, how about next time there's a tournament, how about I come and you come, and maybe we can do a little business while we're there, right? Maybe we can get to know some people who can help us out. Maybe I can learn some of the techniques that you're using to make your field better. You see where I'm going? And so the tournaments gave way to medieval fairs. where the knights may still show up and do their thing, but an awful lot of other activity is taking place. Trade and commerce and entertainment and interaction. We now see the emergence and the rebuilding and the repair of roads that are connecting different places, because business is now being done and crops are being moved longer distances. And so these fairs are becoming bigger as people travel in. I want you to look at this map real quick. Old trade routes, particularly on the sea, on the Mediterranean down south, start to become revitalized. Ships are now going out on the ocean again and traveling longer distances, bringing in goods and items that some people want to buy. Luxury goods, for example, exotic Eastern goods. And the hotbed for all of this is northern Italy. And you can understand by looking at the map. You can understand by looking at the geography. If you are importing stuff into Europe and you want to access the largest market the most efficiently, moving it into northern Italy gives you the easiest way to spread it out, right? You can keep it on the water as far as possible and then move it into Venice or move it into Pisa or someplace like that up north, Genoa. And that will enable you to use the road network to go north, south, east, west, wherever. So northern Italy becomes a real place where lots of business pops up, and towns and urban areas and urban centers are just kind of everywhere. And there isn't one single government. There's a lot of little bitty states that all sort of govern themselves, some bigger than others. A real wealthy one was Venice or Venetia. And you can see it there, Republic of Venice. The city of Venice was a very active port. All kinds of stuff are coming and going. And the Venetians were particularly busy traders with the Turks, the Ottoman Empire. Once it would become the Ottoman Empire, of course. But they would go east to Constantinople, and they were businessmen. They were businessmen, these North Italians. And again, connect that to the idea that we don't have to meet at the medieval fair to do business. Let's do business in a town. Let's do business in an urban center. And the more people that start moving to these urban centers, the more demand there is for the crops that people are growing, because people got to eat. So we're now beginning to once again see a more developed economy and a more developed society. We start to see new jobs emerge, new occupations that reflect the changes that are taking place. We start to see accountants. Got to keep the books straight for the people that do all the trade and business. Bankers. If I make money, I kind of want to keep it somewhere, right? Keep it somewhere safe. And it doesn't take long before these bankers realize, hey, if we're storing money safely, let's loan it out to people and collect interest, right? So a whole new industry emerges. Insurance starts to pop up, because if I'm a trader and that ship sinks, I'm in real trouble. But if I pay in advance and somebody else is willing to foot the bill if that happens, well, that's good. So the insurance industry emerges. Leaders, particularly in North Italy, where they pioneered this, are going to pass new laws that promote trade and commerce and business. They pass laws regarding contracts, for example, corporations. If you and I sign a deal, it is legally enforceable. That sort of thing. So the world is really kind of picking up steam. We're starting to see real development take place, and that growing population only forces the economy to grow that much more. More people means we need more food means we have more diversity, et cetera, et cetera. And North Italy is going to continue to take the lead for hundreds of years in terms of development and advancement. This is where the Renaissance will eventually emerge for all the same reasons. Let's talk about these towns for just a minute. Some of these were old Roman towns or old Roman cities that had been depopulated during the Dark Ages but are now coming back. Some of them are new that are just kind of popping up out of nowhere. You know, a place where the fair always seems to take place, well, we'll just have people stay there permanently, and eventually it becomes a place. Frequently, of course, they are built along rivers. Almost always they are, because we've got to have a water source. A town is a place to buy and sell goods, do business. A town is a place where you may be able to learn new skills. You can go there to learn to be something other than a peasant farmer. That's good. If you're tired of harvesting all the time, you can do something else. Towns are places for entertainment. You know, people go and have fun and blow off steam. You get the idea. And within these towns, in addition to the educated skills, like bookkeeping and banking and accounting and all of that, a new group of people emerge that are skilled laborers. A new group of people emerge that have abilities that took a long time to develop, but are marketable, that they can make money with. And they are going to make their living supporting this new diversifying economy, providing services that other people need. Skilled craftsmen. I'll ask you, what are some examples of a skilled craft that you might see in a medieval town? You might see somebody that's a what? Blacksmith, right? That's obviously a very common one, right? Now, I'll just clarify this. A smith is somebody who works with metal. Okay, it's just a generic term for a metal worker. And there's different types of smiths. A blacksmith works with iron. A silversmith works with silver. A goldsmith works with gold, right? There's even tinsmiths which work with tin. A red smith works with copper. And so you get the idea. But by far the most common smith is a blacksmith. And everybody in here knows what a blacksmith is. And as all of this iron is now needed, you know, for the plows and the horseshoes and all this other stuff, being a blacksmith during this era is pretty lucrative. You do pretty well if you're driven. You get the idea. But there's other skills. You know, you don't just have to be a blacksmith in a town to provide a skill that other people would need. What might be another skill that we would find in a town? Something that you're not going to learn overnight, but is certainly important. How about a shipbuilder? You better believe it. You were thinking all this. Now, that one is very, very skilled. And these guys made a lot of money. A shipbuilder is called a wright, W-R-I-G-H-T, or more specifically, a shipwright. A wright is kind of a very highly skilled carpenter. And shipwrights could make a lot of money, because building these ships and repairing these ships is a very precise skill. You got to make it tough. You got to make it watertight. You have to get those boards exactly the way they are. I mean, working with the wood is not an easy thing. So shipwrights could make a lot of money. And it's hard work. You know, it's very hard work. So there are also wheelwrights, and a wheelwright makes wagon wheels. You know, and again, it's a skill. You're not going to make as much as a shipwright, but you're not going to make a wooden wagon wheel overnight. It takes a while to learn that. What might be another one? How about a tanner? What does a tanner do? Leather worker. Yeah, a tanner makes saddles and, you know, those horse collars that we see and stuff out of leather. What about a cobbler? What's a cobbler? Yeah, shoes. A cobbler makes and repairs shoes. And a tailor, of course, works with clothing, right? A tailor makes and repairs clothing. How about this one? What is a Cooper? And that one's pretty common because the name Cooper is pretty common today, right? And so obviously we know that there were a lot of these guys around. What does a Cooper do? Anyone want to guess? And this is an important one. You make a lot of money as a Cooper. I'll just let you know right now. You're going to feed your family well if you're a Cooper. Good answer, not quite, but you're kind of on as a woodworker. A Cooper is a barrel maker. And of course, everything getting transported is being transported in barrels, right? Or an awful lot is, at least. And there's two kinds of Coopers. There's wet Coopers and dry Coopers. A dry Cooper makes stuff that hauls dry, and a wet Cooper hauls liquid. In the shipping industry needs lots of wet Coopers because they need lots of barrels that can hold liquid. When you're out on the high seas, you got to have something to drink, right? And that's where also beer becomes a big deal. Beer during this era, and certainly well into the age of exploration, was drunk by sailors so much because when you're on board a ship, the water goes bad pretty quickly, and so they have to have something to keep hydrated with. And the beer was very, very mild in terms of its alcohol content. It would have just enough in there to keep it from spoiling, but the whole point was not to get knee-walking drunk when you're on the ship, although obviously we know sailors did. But it was very much something to keep you hydrated when you're out on the ocean. And making barrels was hard to do. I don't have my, you can see a little bit of it here. Why you would have to have all these different slats, and they all have to fit together just perfectly, right? Each one has to be very precisely cut so it links up and there's no gaps. It's got to be airtight. And so you can imagine it takes years to do that. So what they do is they create these slats, and then they line them all up, and then they heat a copper band. And the copper band gets hot, which makes it expand. Then they hammer it down, and all those pieces come together, and then the band cools and shrinks down and seals it. And then they would do 2 or sometimes 3 of those copper bands, and you got yourself a barrel. Why did old-timey barrels bulge out? They're not cylinders like Coke cans. They have a bulge in it. Anybody think of why that might have been the case? That was by design. Anybody know? It's so one man can roll it down the street. Streets have a lot of rocks and stuff in them, and so if it was a cylinder, it would be hard to roll. But being bulged out, there's just one central axis, which makes it a lot easier. And you can also turn a barrel if it's bulged out like that, or one man can rock it back and forth and get it back up. So start wrapping your head around the fact that you don't learn to do this quickly. You don't learn to do this quickly. So these guys are going to be valuable. They're going to be important. The town dwellers are going to create a new type of citizen that we will simply call the middle class. They are not peasants. They are not farmers. If they play their cards right, they are not poor. Some become obviously quite wealthy. One term to describe them, they are often called burghers, B-U-R-G-H-E-R-S. A burgher is a middle-class town dweller. And that will eventually get Frenchified into the term bourgeoisie. And the term bourgeoisie is a French term for burgher. And towns are often called burgs. Y'all know that today. They are not noble. They don't have noble titles, but they're not poor either. And many of these burghers are literate. Again, you have to be able to read and write to do a lot of these skills. And even if you're a cooper or a blacksmith or whatever, maybe literacy isn't a requirement, but math is. You better be able to add and subtract if you're going to get paid for your services. And so these people, they kind of have a different way of looking at things. Now let's talk about the towns themselves. One characteristic that we need to know is that medieval towns were walled in. They would often have walls all around them. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out why. We are in a safer world, not a safe world. There's still a lot of bad guys out there, and invasions and wars still take place. And so the walls of the city protect us. And once these cities and towns start popping up, Everybody knows that's where the money is, right? Everybody knows there's people in that town with bags of coins. And so if you're going to be a bad guy and you're going to go, steal something, that's going to be where you do it. So walls are there as protection. And to a large extent, even if we're not talking about like a full-scale invasion from some other place, it's also a way to regulate who's in and who's out. Think of Keesler, right? You don't go on Keesler by just wandering onto the base. You got to go through the gate. So the people of Keesler can say, yes, you can come in, or no, you can't, and they know who's there. And if we don't want you in here, you're going out and you're not coming back in. That's the idea. Regulate who gets to be there. Regulate who gets to be there. Now, there's some other aspects that are going to come with this. Everything in life has trade-offs, folks. Every decision you make is going to have some sort of trade-off, and there's definitely a trade-off to putting walls around our cities. Yes, we are safer and more secure, but at the same time, these walls prevent these cities from growing. The population increases, but the physical footprint is real hard to stretch out. And so we get more and more people crammed into the same space, which means overcrowding. It means it's dirtier, obviously diseases. We all know, right? Viruses spread. They didn't know what it was back then, but the more and more people you cram into a place like this, they're not wearing their masks, right? So disease is a very big problem in these towns. Overcrowding is a huge issue, and it also becomes more and more expensive to live in these towns. It takes more and more money to buy a place because of supply and demand. We all know how that works, right? And so over the generations, these towns require you to make a good living in order for you to have a home there. Fires can break out, and man, I don't need to tell you, everything's made out of wood and everybody burns stuff for heat and light. Man, there's going to be fires. They're going to happen all the time, and fires would break out that would just devastate these towns. So every single medieval town burned down more than once, every single one of them. And there is there's no underground water. We can't just get out the fire hoses and spray the water on it. The only thing they could really do at that time, if a fire breaks out, what they would do is everybody would immediately show up and start demolishing all of the structures around it, right, to stop the fire from spreading. And that's it. So, if your house catches on fire and I'm your neighbor, they're going to rip my house down, right? And they don't care, and they're not asking questions because you got to do it real quick. So it was rough. It was, and of course, a lot of times that wouldn't stop it. So fires are a big problem. Disease is a big problem. These towns were actually pretty crime-ridden, even though they did work hard to keep the bad guys out, and the gates would play a role in that with the walls. That doesn't change the fact that there's a lot of thievery, a lot of pickpockets, a lot of all types of crimes. There's plenty of nooks and crannies and back alleys in these places where horrible types of assaults can take place. We can see one response to this, and we do know that there's a real big problem here, because these towns would often punish people very, very severely for petty crimes. Pickpocketing could get the death penalty, that sort of thing. And you think, why would something that we wouldn't consider that serious be so harshly punished? And the explanation is that it's that important to them, and it's that common. And if we don't really set an example out of these guys, it's going to be rampant. So again, we are not living in a safe world. We're living in a safer world. And what makes a people civilized is certainly subject to interpretation. I can assure you of that. Frequently, for example, what they would do is, like, if there's some sort of an event where crime would have taken place, they'll cut the heads off of all the thieves and then put their heads on the road leading into the town, right? So everybody going into that town knows, boy, you better not get caught stealing here. And so it's pretty rough. There's a lot of filth, an enormous amount of filth in these towns. The walls keep it all in. All the garbage is thrown right out the window into the street, including the human waste. That's why the drains are in the middle of the street and not along the sides. And of course, the walls keep it in. So you think, well, it'll rain and wash away. No, it won't, right? The rain, it just, it turns into a big soup in the middle of the street. And then it's just nasty, horses too, all that. And then of course it dries out and the dust is kicking up, and yeah. And of course, the rivers, they're always built on rivers and streams. A lot of times, they would, shovel all that stuff into the rivers, and that would wash it all downstream to everybody else. And you got to keep in mind, that's not good, okay? You think, oh, good, there's a river, it can wash all of our waste away. No, because the people downstream are using that water, and that gives them access to it, which ain't good. Hepatitis, cholera, typhoid, these terrible diseases that come from ingesting contaminated water were just absolutely awful, and they were just very, very common. Yeah. Well, let's pick an occupation for our town. We're going to be a particular skilled craft. Who are we? And we all do the same thing. What is it? What do you want to do? How about we're the Wrights? How about we're the Wrights? Okay, we're the shipbuilders. Now, what you got to understand is that it took a long time, right? It took a long time to develop this skill, right? I didn't learn to build a ship overnight. And if I'm going to invest all of my time into developing the ability to repair and build ships, I expect to get paid for it. You're not going to pay me, peasant wages, because I put a lot of time into investing in myself here. So we're the shipwrights in our community, and we do a good job building those ships. And the guy comes along and he says, I need a couple of shipwrights to work on my boat. I've got a hole in my boat and I need a shipwright to fix it. And I say, hey, buddy, I'll fix your boat, and here's what I'll charge. And then you come along and you say, I'll fix your boat for less than that, because you want the money, you want the business, right? And then you come along and you say, forget those two, hire me, right? Me and this other guy, we'll do it for far less, and we're just as skilled as them. And before you know it, we're competing with each other and driving all the prices down, aren't we? Right? But hey, it's how it works. I want the money, you want the money, I want the business. So I say, okay, guys, let's put the brakes on our work for a minute. Everybody come to my house. We all do the same job. We all know each other. Friday night, we're going to convene at my house. So we all meet at my house. And I say, okay, look, folks, we're undercutting everybody. We're all undercutting each other. We can all fix boats. We can all do good work. Got an idea. How about we agree not to compete with each other? We all agree to fix the price and nobody works for less. Because you see, if we're all the shipwrights in town, where's he going to go if he wants somebody else, right? If the boat, let's say we're in Venice, right? And the boat comes into harbor and the boat is damaged and the boat has to get fixed, and we're the only shipwrights in Venice, he's got to use one of us, doesn't he? So what we're going to do is we're all going to agree to fix the price. And we will decide what we think that price ought to be, right? Because if we all agree not to compete, we can all sort of raise those prices together, can't we? What we have just done is create a guild. And once these towns get going, the guilds emerge. Organizations of specific craftsmen that work together to protect their collective interest. If he wants his boat fixed, he's only got us to choose from, and we have all agreed to one price. And that's the price we want it to be, isn't it? Because, hey, man, that boat is sinking. You don't hire one of us soon, it's going to be on the bottom of the bottom of that ocean, bottom of the Mediterranean, the Adriatic. So there we go. Well, so we all create this guild, and we all agree prices are fixed. And now we're making pretty good money, right? So we go to the town leadership, and we make the town leadership recognize us as the guild. And we've got a lot of influence now because we've got money to spend, don't we? And we've got money to grease the palms of anybody who might be in our way. And then somebody shows up from out of town. And he says, I'm a shipwright too. I can fix a mean boat. And you know what? I don't want to be in the guild. I don't care about the guild. Forget those guys. I'll fix it for cheap and I'm not going to join. So I'll get all the business and the guild can just deal with it, right? No. That's why we grease the palms of the leaders. Are you following me? We get a law passed. Nobody can repair ships in our town unless they are in the guild. It is illegal to do that job without guild membership. Now, what we will do is make sure that the standards are upheld. We will make sure that anybody in the guild is, they're all going to do good work. The quality will be exceptional. We will do our work in a timely manner. We will make sure that the ships get repaired, and we Venetians will have a reputation for fixing and building the best boats out there. But you have to be in the guild in order to do it. Are y'all following me? So the guy comes in from out of town and he says, I don't want to be in the guild. I'll undercut him and make all the business. Sorry, buddy, you got to go somewhere else. That ain't going to work here. The law here says you have to be in the guild to be a shipwright. So the guy comes in from out of town. Now, understand, I'm simplifying this, folks. I'm keeping this a lot simpler. He comes in from out of town and says, okay, I get it. We all have to fix the price to make sure we all make plenty of money, and we all have to set certain standards. So sign me up. I'm joining the guild. And we say, you probably do good work. You've got experience. You're qualified. But I don't think so. Why might we tell that guy, yeah, you're a good shipwright, but we're not letting you in our guild? What might be the problem there? Why might we say no to him? Well, there's only so much business to go around, right? I mean, if anybody can join the guild, before you know it, there'll be too many of us and none of us will be making a living, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to keep our numbers fixed. And we're going to tell that guy, I tell you what, put your name on the list, and over time, if a position opens up, we'll consider letting you in. Are you following me? So membership is restricted. You have to be in the guild. Prices are fixed. Sounds to me like being in the guild is a pretty good thing, right? Not being in the guild, you're in trouble. But what we're doing is looking out for our own interests. That's the whole point. The guild will give society a quality product. It's just they're looking out for number one more than anything else. And the guilds would grow over the generations to become extremely wealthy, extremely powerful, extremely influential in making sure that they prevent honest competition. And if I go to our shipwright who is in the guild and who is charging a very high price to work on those ships, a lot more than I think I ought to be paying, and I say, that's not really fair. You're gouging us for the prices. These guys will fix the boat for a lot cheaper, and you've got laws in place that prevent it. That's not really fair, man. How can you justify it? What do you think his answer is? Because he's going to say, actually, I can justify what we're doing. What do you think it might be? What would his answer be? How about this? I earned it. I didn't become a shipwright overnight. It took me a long time to develop this skill, and I'll be doggone if I'm going to put all of this work into developing this skill and end up getting paid peanuts. Are you following me? And he would say, and as a matter of fact, if being a shipwright didn't pay a good wage, nobody would do it, right? I mean, who's going to go through all of that work only to make the same money as some schmuck who did nothing, right? So we have to have a way to make sure that the people that develop these skills get rewarded for all of that work. I hope you're thinking here, we're kind of developing a different mentality, aren't we? We're kind of developing a different idea in terms of who should have wealth, who should have authority, who should be able to enjoy a prosperous life. If we go to the king or the nobleman and we say, why do you deserve to have all of this wealth and power? What makes you so special that you get to have all of this privilege? The king and the nobleman will say, well, I was born into it, right? I'm a member of a noble family, and that gives me the right, birthright. My dad was this great nobleman, and that means I get to be, and obviously that was God's choice. You get where I'm coming from, right? But if you go to the burgher and say, what gives you the right to make this money and live so well, he would say, I earned it. I put the effort into it, right? And if we go to that shipwright and we say, you know what, this guy over here, he was a dirt poor peasant born into the worst family, had nothing, and he put all that time into it, and he learned how to become a shipwright, and boy, I tell you what, after years of training, he's now not a poor peasant. You're going to applaud him, aren't you? You're going to say, good for him. He moved himself up in life. He put his own effort into doing well, as opposed to that nobleman over there who did nothing but was just born into it. You see a different set of values, right? Now, how can you become a shipwright, right? How can you join the guild? How can you become a cooper or a tanner or a blacksmith or whatever? What is the process? Well, remember, there's going to be a process for becoming a knight, right? During the feudal era, there is a specific pathway that you have to take if you want to become a knight and enter that privileged class. Well, the same is going to be true with the skilled craftsmen that would become guildsmen. You have to follow a specific path to get there, which is what we're going to talk about on Wednesday. Okay, y'all take care. Remember to start Module 5, and let me know if you have any questions.